John Green is a wildly successful author. His young adult novel, The Fault in Our Stars, is one of the best-selling books of all time. In 2014, Time magazine named him among the 100 most influential people in the world. He and his brother Hank are the co-creators of Crash Course, which provides short videos aiming to educate students and casual learners on a wide variety of topics, including world history. Crash Course intends its videos to accompany high school and college level classes, and boasts over 2 billion views. Should a crash course educate or distort the truth to promote a preferred narrative? In the 2015 video, Conflict in Israel and Palestine, with 13 million views to date, John Green purports to get the facts across in under 13 minutes. But rather than facts, some of Green's claims more closely resemble the fiction at which he excels.
Very little of this conflict between Israel and Palestine over the last several decades has been about, theological differences between Islam and Judaism. No one's arguing about whether the most important prophets descended from Abraham's son Isaac or his son Ishmael, right? It's not about whether to fast during Yom Kippur or Ramadan. It's about land.
But theology and land are not mutually exclusive categories. It's impossible to understate the centrality of the land of Israel in Jewish belief. The Hebrew Bible contains over 1,000 mentions of the land, with more than 170 instances connecting God's covenant with the Jewish people to the land of Israel. Wherever Jews lived in the diaspora, they maintained their connection with the land, remembering Jerusalem in daily prayers and during the Passover Seder. On the other hand, Jewish sovereignty in the land posed a challenge to radical Islamist theology.
Portraying the conflict as eternal or as religious makes it feel intractable in a way that, frankly, it isn't.
Whether Green likes it or not, you can't understand the Israeli-Palestinian conflict by removing the religious element. Hamas, the terrorist organisation that controls Gaza, has itself stated that the Palestinian cause is not about land and soil, but it is about faith and belief. Pretending religion plays no role, as Green does, may actually make the conflict more intractable by obscuring the issues that need to be addressed to resolve it. For Green, what's the conflict about?
Competing nationalisms.
Here's how he explains Zionism.
In that hyper-nationalistic empire lived a Jewish journalist named Theodor Herzl who had hoped that Jews could assimilate into European nations, but soon became convinced that the Jewish people needed to leave Europe and settle in their own state. The concept of Jewish nationalism came to be known as Zionism.
Once again, Green's erasing religion from the picture. Herzl's Jewish nationalism didn't come from nowhere. Biblical and rabbinic texts and Jewish liturgical practices all contain expectations of Jewish return to the land. And it wasn't just nationalism that inspired Herzl's Zionism. Rampant anti-Semitism convinced him that the Jews needed a state of their own.
Between 1920 and 1939, the Jewish population of Palestine increased by over 320,000 people. In fact, by 1938, Jews were just under 30% of the population of Palestine. And the growing Jewish population focused on purchasing land from absentee non-Palestinian Arab landowners and then evicting Palestinian farmers who were living and working there.
This couldn't be further from the truth. As scholar Mitchell Bard points out, Jews actually went out of their way to avoid purchasing land in areas where Arabs might be displaced. They sought land that was largely uncultivated, swampy, cheap, and most important, without tenants. In 1920, Labour Zionist leader David Ben-Gurion expressed his concern about the Arab Fellahim, whom he viewed as the most important asset of the native population. Ben-Gurion said, "Under no circumstances must we touch land belonging to fellahs or worked by them." He advocated helping liberate them from their oppressors. Only if a fellah leaves his place of settlement, Ben-Gurion added, should be offered to buy his land at an appropriate price.
By controlling both the land and the labor, they hoped to establish a more secure community within Palestine. But of course, these practices heightened tensions between Jewish people and Arab Palestinians during the 1920s and 1930s.
Of course, Green says, as if Jewish attempts to establish more secure communities must inevitably lead to heightened tensions. Green is victim-blaming. There's nothing inevitable about it. The Peel Commission, which in the 1930s investigated Arab attacks against Jews, instigated by local Arab leaders, observed the many positive consequences increased Jewish settlement had brought to the land, including high wages, job opportunities, and an increased standard of living. Rather than causing heightened tensions, as Green claims, Jews were victims of violent attacks by Arabs. Here's how Green describes the 1939 White Paper, which severely limited Jewish immigration and called for the establishment of a joint Jewish-Arab state within 10 years, abandoning Britain's earlier promise to help support the establishment of a Jewish national home in the land.
The Zionists were angry at Britain for limiting Jewish immigration at a time when Jews particularly needed to leave Europe, and the Arab Palestinians were unhappy about the prospect of waiting 10 years for a state.
Why did the Jews particularly need to leave Europe at that time? Green makes no mention of anti-Semitism or the Holocaust. The murder of 6 million Jews would confirm the Zionist insight that the Jews needed a state of their own, but anti-Semitism isn't even part of the story Green tells.
And then came World War II, which was actually quite a peaceful time in Palestine.
This completely erases the warm relationship and collaboration between Haj Amin al-Husseini, the leader of the Palestinian Arabs, and Adolf Hitler. During a wartime meeting in Berlin, Husseini thanked Hitler for his support of the Palestinian Arab cause, affirmed that Germans and Arabs were natural friends due to their common enemies including the Jews, and discussed plans to recruit an Arab legion for the Axis. Hitler in turn promised that when the Axis won the war, and announced the Arabs' liberation, the Jews of the Middle East would be killed.
In November of 1947, the United Nations voted to partition Palestine into separate Palestinian and Jewish states. The partition plan called for 2 states roughly equal in size, but the borders looked like a jigsaw puzzle. I mean, you do not look at this map and think, yeah, that's gonna work.
Green's making excuses for Arab rejectionism. Jewish leaders weren't happy with the size of the proposed Jewish state, a sliver of the original mandate, or the fact that it excluded Jerusalem, but they accepted the plan. Obviously, they and all the UN member nations who voted for the plan thought it could work. It wasn't the geographic dimensions of the plan that were unworkable, but the Arabs' unwillingness to accept a Jewish state of any size and in whatever borders.
Soon after the plan was announced, the cleverly named 1948 Arab-Israeli War broke out, with Israel on the one side and the Palestinians and many Arab states on the other.
Really, it just broke out? Green is erasing the simple fact that Arabs unwilling to accept the existence of a Jewish state launched the war to destroy the reborn Israel in its infancy. They failed. He uses similarly inaccurate but even-handed sounding language when discussing the 1967 war.
Over the next 18 years, nothing changed territorially, and then in 1967, Israel and several Arab states went to war again.
Once again, Israel and Arab states didn't just go to war. The surrounding Arab nations prepared for a war which they believed would destroy Israel. Again, they failed.
The Israeli government began to establish Jewish settlements in what had been Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip.
No, that wasn't Palestinian territory. It's disputed territory. From 1948 to 1967, Egypt controlled Gaza, while Jordan controlled the West Bank and Eastern Jerusalem. There wasn't and isn't Palestinian territory because there has never been a Palestinian Arab state.
In the late 1980s, Palestinians launched the first Intifada, which literally means shaking off. And this began with boycotts of Israeli products and services and refusing to pay Israeli taxes. But when the Israeli armed forces cracked down on protesters, violence ensued.
Wrong. The first Intifada began with the spreading of false rumours about an accidental vehicular collision, not an illegitimate Israeli military crackdown on peaceful protesters. Here's how Green explains the origins of the Second Intifada.
So the Clinton talks failed, Ehud Barak's government was undermined, and then in September of 2000, Prime Minister candidate Ariel Sharon led a group of 1,000 armed guards to the Temple Mount in the Old City of Jerusalem. To Muslims, this is known as the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and it's the 3rd holiest site in Islam, behind only the Kaaba in Mecca and the Prophet's Mosque in Medina. And it's the holiest site in Judaism, so in short, it's a pretty touchy place to march to with 1,000 armed guards.
Sharon's visit to the Temple Mount wasn't the cause of the Second Intifada, but merely a pretext. Marwan Barghouti, a leader of the Tanzim faction within Yasser Arafat's Fatah movement, led the uprising. He admitted that the uprising was pre-planned and that Sharon's visit to the Temple Mount was the most appropriate moment for the outbreak of the Intifada. There's also Green's choice of language.
Okay, so in the late 19th century, the Ottoman Empire ruled over what we now know as Palestine.
That's not right. The territory was, in fact, then known as Palestine under the Ottomans. We don't now know the land as Palestine. The only country in the area now is Israel. Other territories can variously be called disputed or Gaza in the West Bank, or Judea and Samaria, but decreeing that we now know the whole area as Palestine is factually wrong, and it's not neutral or even-handed. There has never been an independent Arab nation called Palestine.
Palestine, 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 Palestine.
In one brief video purporting to educate on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Green downplays the role of religion, omits important context, gets history wrong, excuses Arab intransigence, and decrees disputed land Palestine. So much for his promised crash course.